Yes.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April MOBB United National Call. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm DePelsha Magruder, and unfortunately, we have technical difficulties this morning. So if you try to join us on Facebook, that isn't working right now, but we're going to go ahead and get started and share it later in the group. And I just want to start by acknowledging that this is Autism Awareness Month. So we have an inspirational quote that I found about autism, which says, "Don't think that there's a different, better child hiding behind the autism. This is your child. Love the child in front of you. Encourage his strengths, celebrate his quirks, and improve his weaknesses the way you would with any other child." And that quote is from Claire Scovell Lebed, I cannot read, Lezebnik, author of Growing Up on the Spectrum. And this is a special month for me always because I have a son with autism. My oldest son has autism. And I often say that he is a big part of the reason, if not the reason, that I started the group. I obviously started the group for all Black boys, but I honestly don't think that I would have been so moved to start Moms of Black Boys United if I didn't have a son with autism, because it just elevated my fears and concerns to a level that were just very heightened in light of some of the challenges that he will face. So going on to the next page, just to share a little bit about the organizational purpose and mission. We are Moms of Black Boys United and MOBB United for Social Change. We are a resource and a voice for moms of Black sons. And Moms of Black Boys United is our 501c3. That's the support and resource side of things. MOBB United for Social Change is our 501c4. That is the advocacy side of things. And we've been at this now for 3.5, almost 4 years. In July, it will be our 4th anniversary. We have a 5-point approach. We focus on influencing policy, changing perceptions, demonstrating our power, which will be critically important this November. It's amazing how much the election has just gone out of the news cycle because of coronavirus. We're now obviously very focused on this global health pandemic, but we still have a national election in the US in November that is critical to our future. So we really need to focus on demonstrating our power there and making sure we all complete the census as well. We also partner strategically with like-minded organizations and individuals, and we promote self-care. So that is a little bit about who we are. If you want to support us, you can text MOBBU to 44321 to donate to the organization, and we can always use your support to keep our initiatives going. So with that, I'm going to get ready to turn it over to our wonderful speakers this morning. I will start by introducing Kimberly Robinson Alexander. Kimberly is the chair of our Special Needs Committee, as well as the chair of our MOBB Connections database effort. That is an ongoing effort to create a comprehensive database of resources for moms of Black sons to deal with all kinds of issues. She is a graduate of John Jay College. She studied forensic psychology. I believe I got that right. Sounds very deep and complicated. And she's been a pediatric special needs nurse for 10 years. And most of all, Kim has been a faithful member of MOBB United from the very beginning. I remember when, I don't remember how many days after I started the group, she reached out to me and said she wanted to lead special needs and sent this whole comprehensive proposal on how she would approach it. And then we met in New York, which was beautiful, and we've been together ever since. So thank you, Kim, for all that you have done over the past 3 years and all that you continue to do. And I certainly look forward to hearing from you and Nicole this morning, because I think this is the information I need as a mom. I'm not that far along in the journey yet, and this is what I really need to know. So thank you for putting this together. And as you're talking about it, I think you should also share like all of the things you're doing this month for Autism Awareness Month so that people will know how to find that both in our group and on the site. I will turn it over to you, and then I'm going to go post in the group to let people know what's going on.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Like DePelsha said, my name is Kimberly Alexander, and I've been a member of MOBB from the beginning. I am a special needs pediatric nurse, and all things special needs are near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about transitioning for individuals who have autism. And throughout the month, we will have graphics that are going to go up into the group. We are going to highlight individual sons who are on the spectrum. And we're going to continue to share information about how to prepare for when your sons begin their journeys without you. With that, I want to go ahead and get started and introduce to you Nicole Anthony, who is a leader in her field. She is an autism specialist. She is received her doctorate degree from Old Dominion University, and is a chair at Fayetteville State University. She is a special education advocate, and she is also the founder and executive director of Elijah's Place. So with that, without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to share her screen, introduce herself further, and let's get started.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. Let's go into start presentation here. Can everyone see?
We can.
Awesome. All right, so again, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Nicole Anthony. I am an assistant professor of special education at Fayetteville State University. Go Broncos, we are a proud HBCU. And today we're going to discuss the road to independence using a strengths-based approach to transition for Black boys with autism. So not only am I assistant professor, but I'm also a researcher and an author. But more importantly, I'm a mother of 3 boys, 1, 2, 3, 3 boys, 2 of which are diagnosed with autism. Elijah, who is 23, and Gabriel, who is 14. Gabriel is starting this journey to transition. He's headed on to high school, and Eli is well on his way. So before we begin today, I need to take a step back in order to move us forward. I told Kim I wouldn't share this story because it makes me really emotional, but you need to understand why we're having this conversation today about transition in particular. Yes, it's my research interest, but I have more of a personal investment in this topic. So a couple of weeks ago, my son Gabriel, he was diagnosed with the flu. And, you know, so the flu bug was going around the house. I didn't think Elijah, who was 23, would catch, you know, the flu. I didn't think he would get sick because Eli is a former preemie, 1 pound, 6 ounces. He was in the hospital 3 months, 3 weeks, and he hasn't looked back since. So he hasn't had any major health issues. I mean, we go to the doctor regularly. He has his checkups, things are all great. Until 2 weeks ago, he came down with a fever. How did I know he was sick? Well, he was walking around really sluggish, and I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Mom, I feel heavy." And I'm like, well, what does "I feel heavy" mean? What does that mean? So I felt his head. He was burning up. He laid down on the couch, and of course, the orange juice, the Motrin, things of that nature. Fever broke. He started to feel better. Fever came back on. And in that moment, I, as his mom, you know, it shook me to my core. This child has not been sick in years. We haven't had any major issues. And now with this COVID-19 pandemic, you know, the fever, the flu, I was scared. And I was most scared because I'm thinking to myself, what is going to happen to Eli when I'm not here? Who is going to take care of him, you know, when I'm not around anymore? So today, ladies, you know, and I did cry. It was very emotional for me because even with him being able to articulate the fact that he felt heavy, when I asked him probing questions like, okay, how does your stomach feel, things of that nature, he was unable to articulate, you know, and answer those exact questions. So it just made me think about life after. So today our discussion is really centered around the transition process, life after high school, but I wanted to take it a step further and think about life after us, because we're not going to be here forever. And we need to start planning now. Even if this is your first IEP, we need to begin with the end in mind. Where do we see our children in the future? So Let's ease on down this road to independence. Today, we're going to discuss self-determination and self-advocacy, two terms I want us to keep in mind as we're having this discussion today. Then we're going to look at what the federal law indicates and transition in adolescents with autism. How can we use a strengths-based approach to transition? What exactly is a circle of support? And then we're going to look at guardianship, conservatorship, and power of attorney. Three different things, has three different meanings. But we have the overarching goal of using a strengths-based approach when planning transition activities for adolescents with autism. Because at the end of the day, we want our children to be self-determined. So everyone who is participating in this webinar, I want you to think back to when you were a teenager. When I was a teenager, I wanted to do 3 to 4 things. I wanted to get out my parents' house. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to be completely independent. I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. And I wanted to have a car. Those were my goals, my dreams, my aspirations as a teenager. Self-determination is a person's ability to control his or her own destiny. A crucial part of this concept of self-determination involves the combination of attitudes and abilities that will lead children to meet certain goals they set for themselves and take the initiative to meet those goals. Our children with autism have dreams, they have goals, they have ambitions, they have visions for their lives. How are we helping them meet these challenges? How are we using their strengths and their interests? How are we building on them in order for them to meet their goals? And we talk about abilities, right? So one ability that our children need to have is the ability to self-advocate. Self-advocate is the ability to just to speak up for yourself. How do you get your needs met? How do you negotiate? Do you know your rights? Do our children know their rights? Have you disclosed that your child has an autism diagnosis to them? Disclosure is key, right? And self-advocacy, because if you don't know exactly how autism impacts you, how can you advocate for your needs? So keep those two terms in mind as we have this conversation today. It's not really a presentation, it's a conversation because I'm talking all to moms of children with autism. All right. So what does the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 indicate about transition planning? LEAs are mandated by Congress, the federal government, to ensure that children with disabilities, by the time they reach the age of 16 in most states, that the IEP contains transition goals, plans, and services related to his or her needs and interests. Now, the states are mandated by the age of 16 to address transition. However, in some states, you can start as early as 14. So know what your state's law indicate about transition planning and when it's supposed to start. As I said before, Gabriel has started the transition process because he's about to move to high school. So just looking at the law a little bit, the transition process is a results-oriented process. It's formal. It's a part of the IEP team meeting. So they'll call a team meeting, and around when your child turns 14 or so, they're going to start looking at and they're going to start assessing your child's needs and interests and career choices. And it's a formal process that's results oriented, and it looks at the academic and functional achievement of your child. And they're looking at how your child is going to move away from high school. Some activities that they're going to discuss during that transition meeting is post-secondary education. Some of our children go on to college, traditional college, which is maybe a 4-year or a 2-year community college, while some of our children, they want to go into a trade field, which is perfectly fine. Some of our children leave high school and go straight into the workforce, some type of integrated employment opportunity with supports in place. Other children, they go into an independent living situation and they're involved in the community. So transition is going to look completely different for every single child. It is supposed to be an individualized process, just like the IEP. And the programming that's put in place is supposed to be needs-based and based on the strengths and interests of your child. If they are not conducting assessments during this whole process, you need to stop it and ask. This is just not an informal meeting. And also, along with those assessments, once you put that transition plan in place at the age of 14, every year you're going to revisit it to make sure that it still meets the needs of your child. Now, before we start talking about stats, I want to place these next couple of data points in context. Congress mandated, as you know, the federal government has to mandate a lot of things to be done. Congress mandated that a study is conducted, the National Longitudinal Transition Study. It is the study's available for public view. And what they wanted to look at is the transition activities of students with disabilities, adolescent students with disabilities. And there are about 11,000 participants and family members. They surveyed them and they made calls and interviews. As I said before, about 11,000 students participated and they followed them over 8 years. So not only were they looking at transition activities, they also looked at life after high school. And it happened in 5 ways. Every 2 years or so, they checked in to see how the child was performing. And the data sample was large enough where they could make some generalized statements about certain groups of children with disabilities. So Dr. Paul Shattuck, he decided to interpret some of the data. Dr. Paul Shattuck is a known researcher in the area of autism. He deals with life outcomes of students with autism. He is at Drexel University and he has actually a site dedicated to life outcomes for individuals with ASD. So these are some of the data points that he shared via his website, via fact sheets. So according to Shattuck and colleagues, Black or African American teens with autism were more likely to have difficulty than their peers in several areas, not one area, not 2 areas, not 3, several areas. Our children had difficulty with communicating, having conversations, self-care, and adaptive behavior, those daily living skills, how we take care of ourselves. And they had a difficult time independently getting to places outside of the home. And that one stuck out to me. Independently getting to places outside of the home. As a Black mom of 2 Black boys with autism in that age range, because they surveyed children ages 13 through 16, and they followed them for 8 years. And I'm thinking to myself, is it the fear of our children going out there on their own that possibly impacted whether or not our children went outside independently or was able to navigate the community on their own? Was it fear of interactions with police, things of that nature? But I digress. We could talk about that a little later. Other facts that he was able to gather: young adults with autism had the lowest rates of post-secondary education. Most of their peers, in comparison, like speech and language impairments, learning disabilities, students with emotional disturbance, children with autism had the lowest rates of post-secondary education. Other data sources? Come on. Why aren't you moving? Oh, here we go. So now we're looking at adults with autism and employment. In the late 20s, young adults with autism had far lower rates of employment than their peers. So you can see children with learning disabilities, or young adults, young adults with learning disabilities, they were in the workforce at a 95% rate. But our young adults with autism, 58%. And it's even lower for our Black young adults with autism. Black youths or young adults with autism in employment were almost twice as many young adults with autism, 66% worked compared to Black young adults with autism. So what can we say about those data points? So and here's another one. In comparison to our children's Hispanic peers, our children participated less in transition activities than the Hispanic peers. So not only are our children having a difficult time with communicating in social situations, they're not engaging in community activities independently as much as their other peers, but we're also not involving them in the transition process. And I'm wondering why. And again, the sample was large enough so that people can make generalized statements about groups. I'm not saying that people who are a part of this call today aren't doing these things. However, these are general statements that were made about Black children with autism. So next steps, knowing where our children are at this particular time, how do we prepare our children for life after high school? What supports do we need to have in place? More importantly, how do we prepare for life after us? I am recommending, why are you not moving with me? Oh, okay, sorry everyone. Let's see, we'll do this. Come on. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I'm recommending that we take a strengths-based approach. Perfect. A strengths-based approach, which involves a shift from a deficit mindset. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disability that impacts how a person communicates, behaves, and socializes. We understand that in order for your child to have an ASD diagnosis, they have to have deficits in two areas. It's a dyad of core deficits in social communication and deficits in or have restrictive interests or repetitive behaviors. So we understand that clearly. And when we develop interventions, we usually develop interventions to address those particular deficit areas. But that doesn't mean that our children do not have strengths, that they do not have interests, and they aren't capable of using these strengths and interests and embedding them into learning opportunities. When I mean embedding them into learning opportunities, how can we use our children's intense areas of interest? So if your child loves history, how can you embed historical information within the day or different learning activities for your child? If your child, even if he's interested in video games, if he is interested in SpongeBob, how can you embed those interests into different learning opportunities? Now, the strength-based approach acknowledges each child's unique set of strengths, interests, and challenges. We're not saying that forget about the fact that your child might have difficulty with having a conversation with a peer, or he's having a difficult time making friends. We're not saying that. However, it doesn't have to always be the central focus. Here we go. There we go. So Steps for recognizing strengths. If you haven't really thought about your child's strengths, we have steps for recognizing strengths. Consider different types of strengths. Now, it could be that your child is really, really kind. It could be that your child has excellent money management skills. It could be that your child really is a help around the house. Think about different ways or different strengths that your child has currently. And what I've done is I gathered information from understood.org. And if you have access to this PowerPoint, I left the hyperlinks in. There are a lot of great information about how you can recognize your child's strengths. Also, after you've considered different types of strengths, follow your child's interests. Sometimes strengths come out as your child explores interests. Learn about ways to help your child pursue passions and discover new strengths. For instance, tell you a story. I met this young man at a Harris Teeter, and I was buying some lunch meat, and he just decided to tell me. I knew, being around individuals with ASD for so long, that he had some of the characteristics, some of the mannerisms of a young man with ASD. And as he is getting my order together, he said, you know what? Tomorrow, I am going to pursue my passion. And I'm like, really? And he said, you know what? My mom is going to take me to audition for Power Rangers. I'm like, Power Rangers, really? He was just so open. He was so honest, and he was so excited. And, you know, he was sitting there. He had a job, but his mother said, you know what? I'm going to allow him to pursue his interests. You have this job here, but since you've always wanted to be a Power Ranger, I'm going to take you to the audition. And he was absolutely excited about that. So the following week, I came back to find out whether or not he got the job as being a Power Ranger. He said no, but he said he's going to keep pursuing that passion of his, which was excellent. What you can also do is help your child identify strengths. Now, there's a hyperlink to a strengths chain where you can write out your child's strengths on slips of paper. And on the slips of paper, you can connect them to make a chain. And it's like a visual representation. And you can put it around the room in the house where the child can always reference back to what his or her strengths are. And then, or you can have an accomplishments box. Everything that your child does well, big or small. We think that helping with the laundry, sorting clothes, washing dishes, taking out the dog, these are all accomplishments, right? That you can put into a box so that the child can always reference back to it. You need to talk about strengths more. If we're so focused on deficits and what our children can't do, it's hard for us to shift that mindset to talk about what they can do. And like I would always tell my teachers, I don't want to hear about what a child can't do. I want to hear about what the child can do. And that's how we scaffold skills. We figure out exactly what the child can do at first, and then we build. And we build to a level of mastery. So even with my teachers that I work with who always say, well, the child can't do this, the child can't do that. Don't tell me that. Tell me what the child can do, and then we can build from there. You have to keep an open and honest dialogue about strengths, and with that, and challenges, with that, disclosure. I know some parents believe that keeping the autism diagnosis from their child is best for them. However, more than likely, your child is wondering, why do I behave differently from my peers? Why am I having such a difficult time making friends, or I have such an intense interest in a particular area? they need to know about their autism diagnosis. It helps them normalize some of their interests, behaviors, characteristics. We're not saying the child is the autism diagnosis. However, what we're saying is that some of the symptoms associated with the disorder is going to impact them. And they need to know how those symptoms, those characteristics impact them so that they can learn how and to be able to cope and learn how to build in strategies to support themselves. So continue the conversation. Take note of your child's strengths and successes. Watch your child in action. Take notes. Very simply, as they're navigating the household, notice what they're doing when you're not directing, them. Observe challenges too. If they're having a difficult time opening something, if they're having a difficult time possibly heating up something for themselves to eat, take note of those challenges. Daily living skills. What you'll find is that the single most important predictor of positive outcomes in adulthood is the mastery of self-care skills such as bathing, dressing, cooking, and cleaning. And if you go back to Dr. Shattuck's data points, you'll find that, and that national sample was one of the things he said that we had difficulty with as parents of children with autism. One of the difficult things that our children it was challenging for our children, those daily living skills, the grooming, the chores, cooking, the bathing, things of that nature, being able to navigate the community. So what we have to do is, that might come down. What we have to do is work on those skills and don't start from what the child can't do. What can he do? And if you need to complete a task analysis in reference to a particular skill, break that skill down, or break that task down to smaller steps and have that child complete those steps in order to achieve that particular task. So it can be time consuming, but it'll help your child in the long run be more independent. So if your child is not independently bathing, how can you break that whole routine down where that child can take ownership of those tasks and eventually scaffold them where he's building the mastery of that particular task or skill? So think about that. Also, social communication skills. How we navigate social situations. We know that the defining characteristic of autism is deficits in social communication skills. Dr. Shattuck also noticed this as well. You know, our children had a difficult time navigating conversations, navigating social situations, being able to initiate conversations, being able to maintain them, being able to end them. We need to work with our children on communicating in social situations. How are they getting their needs met? Even if they're non-verbal, do they have a particular way in which they communicate? Whether they have an assistive type of technology device, how do they use it? And are other people familiar with it? What I'm doing with Eli now, because he is 23 and we have plans, or he has plans to eventually move out on his own and have his own house and obtain a job so that he can take care of his house. That's what he talked about doing, pursue his career as being a writer. So what I've stopped doing with Eli to develop his social communication skills even more, because he's a pretty social child. I mean, if you get to know him, he'll talk to you. However, with new people, novel situations, that's where you might see some of his it might be more challenging for him. So what I'm doing for him is I'm using the Socratic method of teaching with him. Basically what that is how I'm developing his critical thinking skills. I'm asking him questions. I'm not telling Eli what to do anymore. I am more so asking him what he thinks needs to happen. So when he is cooking, he can warm up a pizza with the best of them. He can follow the directions on a box. He can follow them very well, as long as he has that visual. You know, if he's preparing a meal and he asks me, "Hey, Mom, what time should I take it out?" Instead of telling him in 20 minutes, nope. Well, what time did you put it in? And then he'll have to go back and look at what time he put the pizza or whatever his meal is in the oven. And he'll come back and say, well, I put it in at 4:20. So how long does it have to stay in? Well, did you look at the back of the box? What is the suggested baking time? Then he'll have to go look. And I'll continue to ask him these probing questions where he has to think for himself and he has to apply certain skills in order to complete a task. So that's how I'm developing his critical thinking skills, but I'm also working on his social communication skills as well. Now, here is the difficult conversation, because we talked about using our child's strengths and interests and embedding them into learning opportunities, how to develop our daily living skills and our social communication, if we need to create or do a task analysis and breaking a task down into doable parts. And that's also ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. For some of us who have children who receive that type of therapy. But now here's another part of the conversation. So we're preparing our children for life after high school. But now let's talk about life after us. What type of supports do you currently have in place for your child? Who can your child look to if something happens to you? A circle of support is a group of people who are intentionally invited to come together in friendship and support a person with a disability for the purposes of protecting their interests in the future. If something were to happen to you, who would look out for your child? Does your child know his or her doctors? Does your child know who next to look to? Where would your child live? These are things you need to think about. And I know some of you might say who are on, well, my child is only 5 and this is, we just got diagnosed. In special education, we begin with the end in mind. We don't begin with that first IEP. We look at where this child will be after he leaves high school. And that's the frame of mind that you need to have. We need to begin with the end in mind. What current supports do I have in place? And how will my children access those supports? Very important, very important. Some of our children will need a guardian, and that's okay. I obtained guardianship over Eli after he turned 18. It is best that you start the guardianship process at 17 and a half, because once your child reaches the age of majority, it's going to be more difficult for you to get a court to believe that your child is incapacitated, incompetent, depending on the state, what term that they use. So I'm going to tell you how I obtained guardianship for Eli after the age of 18. I started the process late, life was happening, but I knew I needed, we were in a situation where Eli needed guardianship. He wasn't quite prepared as yet to make certain decisions on his own. So I enlisted the help of a lawyer and we started the guardianship process. The course is a court regulated process where the courts assign your child a guardian ad litem to act on interest or on the behalf of the child. And I started the process with the lawyer, and we went to court. And the guardian ad litem, she made appointments to come to the home just to talk to Eli, to see the living situation, and to determine whether or not I needed to obtain guardianship over Eli and make some decisions on his behalf. So I was out with my father one day. I knew the guardian ad litem was coming to the home, but she decided to come to the home early. And she calls me and says, you know, I'm in front of your house. And I'm like, okay. And she rang the door. She was very forward. She rang the door, and then Eli calls me. He beeps in. He tells me that a white woman is at the door. I'm telling you exactly what he said. He said there's a white woman at the door, but he's not saying it through a closed door. He is saying it with the door open. And he's looking at her. Now, what's the red flag in this? Ding, 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 safety issue. You've opened the door for someone you have never met. You never met this woman, and you opened the door for her. So she's talking to me. Eli's on the other line, and I connect the two. And I said, Eli, please close the door. I know who the woman is. That's okay. You know, lock the door, close it. So I hung up the phone with Eli, but I told her, this is why I need guardianship. Number one, safety issues. So that's how I obtained guardianship over Eli. Now, will I have guardianship forever? No, that's not the plan. That was never the plan. Right now, we're taking the time to build those skills necessary so that Eli can live independently. While 86% of typical peers, Eli's typical peers eventually will live independently, only 4% of individuals with ASD live independently. I want Eli to be a part of that 4%. Guardianship is a court-ordered arrangement in which one person is given the legal authority to make decisions on behalf of another person, whom the court deemed to be incapacitated. The guardian's decision-making authority extends to all areas specified by the court. So there are two types of guardianship: limited, where you're making decisions in certain areas; in general, where you're making decisions about every aspect of a person's life. And the court will determine exactly what decisions you're making as far as educational, health, things of that nature. So think about whether or not your child will need a guardian once he turns the age of majority, which is 18. Then, you know, some of our children, before we talk about conservatorship, some questions that you need to ask yourself: is guardianship necessary? Can your child seek medical care? Can your child weigh the risk and benefits of any particular medical procedure that is being proposed? Can your child understand the need for routine medical care? Can he set his own doctor's appointments? Can he travel to the dentist on his own? Can he, be able to keep up with these appointments? Educationally, can your child grasp the essentials of his or her own learning problems? Can he articulate the need for certain supports? Can he advocate for him or herself to obtain necessary educational services? These are questions you need to ask yourself, and how you're preparing your child to meet these particular areas. Is guardianship necessary? When we think about finances, does your child understand money basics? Can he keep his money safe? Can he budget? As far as living arrangements, provide for his or her own physical care. We have every single day, I work with Eli on his money basics every single day. Yes, he has a debit card, but he also has cash on hand, because anything can happen with a debit card. And what Eli does really, really well, he can estimate, and he knows how to use his calculator. He always asks for a receipt, so he knows exactly how much money he should get back when he's purchasing something, and he knows how to go to the store and purchase his items. So we work on that skill every single day. So conservatorship and power of attorney. Conservatorship is completely different from guardianship. Conservatorship manages the finances. A conservator has no authority to make personal decisions. And I'm not a lawyer, but here's the thing. You can be a conservator, but it doesn't mean that you can make medical or educational decisions. You would also need guardianship along with conservatorship. So if you have, if your child has some type of inheritance or some type of estate, and you think that your child might have difficulties with managing his money, then yes, you need to, and this is also court regulated, you need to go to court and see whether or not you can gain conservatorship over your child's finances. Power of attorney, completely different. Your child will need to appoint you as the authority to make decisions on his or her own behalf. And it's agreed upon, it's a legal document. Get your lawyer involved. Unlike guardianship with power of attorney, courts are not involved, and the arrangement is often simpler and easier to change. In some states, you can have an agreement typed up. Both of you can sign it and you can get it notarized, but know your state's rules and regulations and laws. The individual maintains more control over decisions than with a guardianship arrangement, and as a result, this option is more common among more independent individuals. And yes, if this is something that you can do to support your child, then go for a power of attorney. If your child needs guardianship, that's something you need to pursue as well. Do not wait until the child reaches the age of majority. Start examining options as if you need the court to get involved at around the age of 17. Even if your child is 5, remember, begin with the end in mind, because at the end of the day, our children will not remain children forever. I have some resources available for everyone. Autism Speaks have several toolkits available for parents. There's an advocacy toolkit, a transition toolkit. Understood.org also has 5 steps to recognizing strengths and interests, and little activities that you could do with your child at home in order to promote independence, self-determination, and self-advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole, for all of that wonderful information. I know it was enlightening to me. I hope it was enlightening to you ladies who are joining us on the call. We're going to transition now just to talking a little bit about how all of this affects healthcare. So from a healthcare perspective, we start transitioning our individuals with disabilities at the age of 14. And how that looks for parents is much like the meeting that you can have with at schools with IEP meetings. However, you sit down with your healthcare team and you begin to talk about what your son's needs are as they're transitioning in healthcare. I always speak to my parents and I encourage them to begin a binder. Just a regular binder with loose leaf paper to write down information, as well as to keep all of the after visit summaries or any other documentation that you receive during your healthcare appointments. This is important because as your son continues to transition, they start to pick up the responsibility of making appointments, like Nicole said, being responsible for advocating in the healthcare setting. And you want to make sure that they have all of the information that they need in order to effectively manage their healthcare needs. And so you want to make sure that in that binder, you have phone numbers for their primary care specialist, the pharmacy that they're using. You want to make sure that you have information about any specialist they see and their support staff members. So if they have occupational therapy, if they have physical therapy, if they have speech therapy, you want to make sure that they can access in one centralized location everything they need to manage their healthcare. You also want to make sure that you are listed on your son's chart as someone who can speak to their providers. When I have a parent who calls in, if there is no notation on the chart that I'm able to disclose information to someone who is already 18, I'm unable to provide that information. And that can truly be to the detriment of our sons. Also, keep in mind that as we talk about power of attorneys, many hospitals do not acknowledge power of attorneys in the same way. There is a difference between a regular power of attorney and a medical power of attorney. So you want to make sure that you have all of the documentation needed to support and to help your son along as he continues to navigate the healthcare system. In addition to that, I encourage our moms and dads to have their child make their own doctor's appointment. Be there in the room with them, but help them to make the phone call, understand what it entails to actually get an appointment set up, what they need to have, what information they need to provide. The same with pharmacies, calling in refills for medication and advocating for themselves. Also want to talk about the differences between your child's strengths and passions. So you can have a strength and it doesn't necessarily mean that it equates to a passion. And so I'm going to ask, that was one of the questions that we had posted. So I'm going to ask Nicole to elaborate on that a little bit.
Hold on. Okay, so I'm going to go back. So can you say the question again? I'm sorry.
The question was related to when someone has a strength versus a passion. And does every strength equate to something that they can do in terms of industry?
No, not necessarily. Although it depends on what it is and it depends on the situation. If you are passionate about, I'm going to take Eli, for example. Eli is passionate about, and he has an intense interest in comic books and manga, cartoons, I don't know, anime, I'm sorry, my lingo. He's interested in anime. So he writes about, and he writes his own anime books. So for him, that passion can turn into a career choice. It all depends on your child's interests. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. We do have another question, Nicole.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on strength chains?
Okay. So with the strength chains, basically you're cutting up strips of paper and you're writing out different strengths of your child, and you're connecting them. And they're all interlocking, and you can place them around the room. So basically you're taking a piece of paper, you're cutting it in half, you're writing out the strength, you're folding it, and how many strengths are like links, and they're linked together. And it's just a visual representation of what your child can do, and you can place it in the house or around the house.
Another question was, how do you know when to disclose an autism diagnosis to your son?
That's a great question. So let's see. I disclose, okay, so with Gabriel, I'm going to take Gabriel for instance. Gabriel started he was always a quirky kid. Gabriel was always quirky. He engaged in pica. He was also a preemie as well, but not as he wasn't delivered as early as Eli. But I've always known that Gabriel was a child with autism. But I said, you know what? I'm going to let this quirkiness ride until we, come to that point where I need to disclose him. I didn't get him diagnosed, although he did receive early intervention services, and they did offer ABA services, but I said, no, Gabriel will be fine. So I rejected that offer of ABA services. But anyway, he turned 12, he got to middle school, and that's where you start seeing those social challenges. You really start seeing those social challenges. And I felt at that particular time, because he was having a really challenging time with making friends, and he wanted to know why. Why was he different from his twin brother? Gabriel's a twin. His brother Mark was a social butterfly, and he was not. And he wanted to know the reason why. So that's when we started to go through the process of having him diagnosed. So he was 12. And I will say this, for every child, it is different. However, if you see him or her struggling with understanding him or herself, then that's when you need to disclose. If he's wondering, why do I need to have, or for some children, they might have a weighted backpack. Why am I having so many sensory issues? Why am I having such a difficult time making friends? That's when you need to disclose.
The next question is, do you have any advice on managing some of the behaviors that sometimes go along with autism, such as meltdowns, inappropriate touching of others in public, etc.?
Okay. So, yeah, that's a huge challenge. Meltdowns. All behaviors have a purpose. I will say that. I'm a behaviorist by training. All behaviors have a purpose. You need to figure out the purpose of that particular behavior. When and where you need to put on your investigator hat and figure out when and where is your child having that particular meltdown. What situations actually precipitate him or her in touching someone. When are these things happening? Once you figure that out, then you can start developing some type of strategy to address that particular behavior. If the situation is when going outside, your child has an issue with the sounds and the noises, things of that nature, you can tell him or her a social story before you even go out, so that he or she knows exactly what to expect before he enters a situation. As far as the touching, those are going to have to be clear, concise conversations of things we can and cannot do in certain situations. So without knowing it, the particulars of behaviors, it's hard for me to have a more clear, concise answer. I could speak broadly about it, though. Oh, we have 18 more questions. Wow, okay. Okay, let's go.
You threw me with that one. So just to add to some of the anxieties of meltdowns, if you know that there's a sensory item, whether it's a weighted vest or something that your son carries in their hands that provides some sort of comfort to them, just make sure those things are available to them as well. So, if they go out with a particular teddy bear, or if they just like that sensory weighted item on them, those are all great things to have on hand to help when they're in a situation where they start melting down or are experiencing anxiety.
And it's okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kim.
No, go ahead. I was going to ask the next question. If you want to elaborate, go on.
Sure. And it's okay to remove a child from a setting. I'm not advocating for you to avoid situations because that's life. We're going to be in certain situations that make us uncomfortable. But if it gets too overwhelming for the child because you don't know to what degree that particular sensory issue is impacting that child at that moment, then you can remove them and you can try again later. But as Kim said, absolutely, if there is some type of device or toy or something that can help them manage during that difficult time or that experience, have it with them, or that weighted vest, you know, just to help them.
Is an IEP required to participate in transition activities, or can they have a 504?
Okay, so IEP. All right, so the difference between the IEP and the 504, with the IEP, you have the special education team involved, team process. With that 504, who manages that 504 is the general education teacher. So you can talk about transition. However, will it be as formal as an IEP, as an IEP team meeting? No, it is not. No, it is not. I mean, of course, you can talk about anything during that 504 meeting. However, it's not going to be as formal. And you more than likely aren't going to have goals. And that plan is not going to be formally put in place.
How do you manage random noise making and constant babbling?
I don't manage it. I just don't. I mean, again, it depends on when and where it's happening, right? All behaviors have a purpose. If that random babbling is happening when they're watching a movie, maybe they're excited about something. Why try to manage it? That's my question. It's serving a purpose. Oh, 21.
So it's not, you don't have 21 questions.
Oh, it's not?
No, that's what you see because you haven't opened up your chat. So let me take away your anxiety.
Let's go. Let's go. Okay.
How do you deal with people who don't understand autism and want to offer you advice based on the one person with autism they know, who usually went on to graduate with a PhD and is some kind of genius, or based on something they saw on TV, an autistic musical or math genius? I find this incredibly annoying, so I generally avoid talking about it with people unless they have some experience with it. Is there a better, is there a better way to handle talking with the general public about autism and what our sons face?
Great question, because everyone knows something about autism. So I would say you're in all rights to say, you know what, I don't want to take your advice. Thank you so much. And it's not your job to have to educate everyone about autism. That's first and foremost. You know, you have enough on your plate with your own child, and you're trying to help him meet his goals and objectives and meet his needs. Honestly, although I'm an autism advocate, I do not wear that title every single day. I don't think it's my responsibility to educate everyone. And if someone offers me their opinion, I kindly say, no, thank you. I got this. And that's okay for you to say.
Additional questions? What are your recommendations on dealing with those in decision-making positions in school system who are unhelpful? Well, I'm gonna actually start, Nicole's gonna jump in on this one, but I spend a large amount of my time dealing with my special education team for, in the past, my older children, and currently for one of my sons. And I think the best advice that I have is to document everything, but also to understand and know what rights your child has. I think a lot of times we go into these meetings and we don't necessarily know all that we're entitled to and how those things are supposed to be approached. I often say my third job is dealing with the education system. So learn the information first. I had to learn the information for myself before I walked into a meeting, so I knew exactly what it was that I was entitled to, exactly what it was my son was entitled to, who I could have in the meeting with me, whether that was an advocate or just someone to show support, and what was available to me the moment I walked into the meeting. I think that's the best advice that I can give you. Just know what you want, write it down. Don't allow anyone to tell you that you can't have it. Be able to show exactly where that information is found, and just know your rights. Nicole?
It's easy. Okay, so stepping back into the mom role, not even thinking about the 18 years that I spent as an educator, it's a very emotional time where you're heading into IEP. So having that mindset that you are advocating for your child, it can be very emotional and have to deal with a person who is unhelpful. I have dealt with a lot of unhelpful people, a lot. And what I've had to do is assert my rights as a parent. What you'll find in the law is that when you look at the tenets of IDEA, there is one tenet that is pretty much unchallenged, and that's parents' rights. Parents' rights are absolute. And you know why? You know why that is? Because if we do not sign an IEP cannot be put in place. You can agree, you can disagree, you can agree to disagree. That's all within your rights. And if you don't understand something, and I know, of course, we want you to be as knowledgeable as possible, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And you don't have to sign an IEP meeting, especially if you're in a contentious situation. If something is happening within that IEP meeting and you're feeling rushed, you don't have to sign an IEP at that time. You can go home and research. That IEP cannot be put in place without your signature. So remember that. You have the ultimate power in that IEP team meeting. And if you're dealing with someone who is adversarial within the meeting, you can excuse them. They can provide their information and then you can kindly excuse them. Parents, we have to take back our power during these meetings. Now, we know we have a lot of experts at the table when we have in those IEP meetings. However, you are an expert in your child and you need to flex those rights.
So there was another question asking about where resources can be found. This is the perfect opportunity to introduce or reintroduce the MOBB United Toolkit. It's located at www.mobbunited.org. We continue to add information to that toolkit. We continue to put different graphics up there as well as templates that will assist in transition, but also just navigating the today that you're dealing with your son. So I encourage everyone to go to www.mobbunited.org, join, and so that you can have access to the Autism Toolkit. We will also be back on April the 16th, and I'm going to get the date wrong, April the 23rd. On those days, we will be discussing the template that has been developed to help navigate and answer the questions that are needed in transition. It's a worksheet to build upon everything that you will need in order to transition your son. That will be on the 16th. On the 23rd, we will also be talking about exploring positive interactions. We know that our sons are not asexual. They do not, they have a desire for relationships. They have a desire for intimacy. They just have it in their own way. And so we want to have the conversation about what that looks like and how to manage those things as well. And that will be on the 23rd. Both of those will be live into the MOBB United Facebook group and will take place at 7 p.m. Again, please stay tuned for other graphics, information, statistics, and supports that will be disseminated within the MOBB Facebook group. We encourage you to take advantage of that and to look into those things.
Kim, I just saw one other question that I think you missed.
Sure.
So I want to go back up, and I don't know if this is only a New York thing or not, but it says 2 questions. My son, who's 20 years old, was just approved for OPWDD. It's phenomenal. Can you talk a bit about that? Also, where did you find your guardianship attorney? Were they recommended to you, or did you do a random Google search? Could you share their contact information?
Okay, so Charmaine, tell me what OPWDD stands for.
Office of People with Developmental Disabilities or something like that. It's I guess it's a New York thing, and I haven't found it to be as great as Charmaine has, but so she should probably speak to it. But it's where I think it, you know what, I think it gets better as kids get older. You know, my son, I don't think is old enough to take advantage of it, but it provides like at my son's age, you know, he's 11, he can get like community rehabilitation, and we can get respite, like someone to come to our house and provide respite services or take him out in the community. I think once you get older, it's more preparation for life, job skills. They even like maybe help you get an apartment, things like that. I don't know because I'm not that far along, but the person we had, which is why we're not doing it anymore, actually stole the kids' clothes. So there's that. But so we haven't tried it since then.
So one of those offices exists in every state. They're not all called the same. You're correct, DePelsha. Here in Texas, it's called DADS. In other states, it's called something different, and they do provide services across the board for different things. One of the national organizations that helps with those types of resources is ARC. So it's called the ARC now. They just recently changed the name to be politically correct. They provide those kinds of services nationally as a private nonprofit organization, but from a federally funded perspective, those types of programs exist nationally. They tend to offer just about the same types of things. It's usually an application process. It looks different when it's done through healthcare versus something that you apply for. It is also available in certain instances as a waiver program for individuals who participate in Medicaid or have Social Security. But it offers different things at different stages of your child's life. And it is basically just supplemental and supportive to try to make sure that your child can access. So I think that that would be the word that I would use, is access to something, whether that's help with activities of daily living to make sure that they can take care of self and then access the community, or just access industry, access healthcare, and things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to thank both of you for all of this great information. I found it very helpful. I'm here in the audience asking questions, and it's been immensely insightful, and I look forward to joining the other sessions later this month as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. I mean, it is just a blessing to have found you all and have you as, you know, a resource for MOBB United, but a personal resource for me as well, as we all try to figure out how to raise these boys together. So Kim, do you want to tease the next call? Because tell people who'll be speaking next month and what that will be about.
Sure. So next month is Mental Health Awareness Month. We have a wonderful young man out of Atlanta. His name is John Wosu, and he will be doing our national call next month. The format will be much like the format here. He tends to be very interactive and engaging with the audience. He has been a pleasure to work with in the past. I'm anticipating an amazing call. We will also be discussing mental health for our boys in terms of our present national situation as it relates to dealing with the coronavirus and isolation and not being able to be in school, as well as talking about us as moms and how we deal with both having our children at home. Some of us are still working, some of us are essential, and how to take care of self and self-care and to protect our psyche.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'm just chatting with people in the group, so I was distracted, but if no one has any other questions, we want to thank you for joining and see you back. When is the first section? The 16th?
The 16th, yes.
Okay, and that one is focused on what?
That is focused on going through the template that we've developed as we continue to plan for transition.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you, everyone. We're gonna see if we can figure out how to share this in the group. I don't know how to do it just yet, but we'll see. We'll see what Zoom is talking about.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Kim.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.